Paris, in the spring of 1944, was a city of shadows, held in the cold, administrative grip of the Nazi occupation. But in the upscale 16th arrondissement, a neighborhood of limestone facades and quiet secrets, a different kind of darkness was drifting from the chimney of a private townhouse at 21 Rue le Sueur. On the afternoon of March 11th, the air grew heavy with a stench so foul it bypassed the lungs and settled in the gut, an acrid, oily smoke that smelled of scorched hair and sour copper. Neighbors had been complaining for days, but the man of the house, a well-respected physician named Dr. Marcel Petiot, was nowhere to be found. By 6 p.m., the local police and firefighters decided they could no longer wait. They forced entry, expecting a routine chimney fire. Instead, they stepped into a waking nightmare that would rewrite the history of French criminology. The basement was a labyrinth of horrors. As the firemen moved through the dim light, their boots crunched on what they thought was gravel. It wasn't gravel. It was a thick carpet of calcined bone fragments and human teeth. In the center of the room stood two massive coal furnaces, roaring with a heat that felt physical, like a punch to the face. When a firefighter swung open one of the iron doors, a charred human hand fell out onto the floor, its fingers curled, as if reaching for a final, desperate grip on the world. Further inspection revealed a pit filled with quicklime, a substance used to accelerate the decomposition of flesh. Floating in a nearby vat of green slime were disarticulated limbs and internal organs, preserved in a macabre state of chemical suspension. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a factory of death. The silent witnesses were everywhere. 47 battered suitcases, piles of children's coats, and a mountain of spectacles and gold fillings. While the police were still processing the sheer scale of the carnage, a man pedaled up to the house on a bicycle. He was lean, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to vibrate with an unnerving intensity. This was Dr. Marcel Petiot. With a staggering display of arrogance, he didn't flee. He looked the officers in the eye and spun a masterful lie, claiming he was a member of the French resistance. He told them the bodies were those of Germans and traitors, and that he was performing a patriotic duty. In the chaos of the occupation, the police, hesitant to arrest a potential hero of the underground, let him ride away into the Parisian fog. To understand how a medical professional could transform a basement into a charnel house, one must look back to the town of Auxerre in 1897. From his earliest years, Petiot was a study in psychological instability. He was the child who found gratification in the suffering of animals, a boy who was expelled from school multiple times for theft and erratic behavior. His service in the First World War only deepened the rot. Discharged for psychiatric reasons after claiming to have been gassed and shell-shocked, he managed to use his high intelligence to secure a medical degree in record time. But Petiot's practice wasn't built on healing. It was built on a foundation of Fly-Tox, his codename for a scheme that preyed on the most desperate people in occupied France. He promised Jewish refugees and those fleeing the Gestapo a safe passage to Argentina for the price of 25,000 francs. He told them they needed a vaccination before they could travel. But as the police began to count the skulls in the basement of Rue le Sueur, they realized that no one ever left the doctor's office for South America. The victims were led into a small, soundproofed room with a single feature that revealed the doctor's true nature, a secret viewing glass. Petiot didn't just want their money, he wanted to watch them die. As the investigation deepened, the investigators realized the smoke from the chimney wasn't just a nuisance. It was the only thing Marcel Petiot couldn't hide. And he was still out there, hiding in plain sight. The air in Nazi-occupied Paris during the early 1940s was thick with the scent of paranoia and cold sweat. For those marked by the yellow star or the crosshairs of the Gestapo, the city had become a claustrophobic cage. This was the hunting ground Marcel Petiot had waited for his entire life, a landscape where people vanished every day and no one dared to ask why. He began circulating whispers of a clandestine escape route he called Fly-Tox. To the desperate, the name sounded like a liberation movement, a way to exterminate the pests of the occupation. In reality, the name was a dark, private joke. To Petiot, his victims were the insects. Adopting the alias Dr. Eugène, Petiot presented himself as a high-ranking member of the French resistance. He offered a golden ticket to Argentina, a land of safety and sun, far from the jackboots on the pavement. But the journey came with strict, peculiar requirements. Each refugee was told they could bring only 2 suitcases, but those bags had to be packed with their most portable wealth: gold coins, diamonds, and high-denomination bills. He instructed them to sew their fortunes into the linings of their coats. He was essentially asking his victims to pre-package their own loot, turning them into walking safe deposit boxes for his eventual withdrawal. When they arrived at 21 Rue le Sueur, the doctor greeted them with a practiced, paternal warmth. He would lead them through the ornate corridors of the townhouse into a small, windowless office. There, he explained the final hurdle. South American immigration laws required a mandatory vaccination against typhus. It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Even the most cynical refugee wouldn't question a doctor's needle. They bared their arms, trusting in the sanctity of the white coat, only to be injected with a lethal cocktail, a concentrated dose of cyanide or digitalis. But the true depravity lay in the architecture of the house. Petiot didn't just want them dead. He wanted to witness the transition. He had constructed a specialized, triangular vaccination room. It was soundproofed with heavy padding and featured a thick iron door with no handle on the inside. Once the poison began to take hold, Petiot would step out and move to a hidden hallway. Through a small, wallpaper-concealed peephole, he watched. He stood in the shadows, a silent voyeur to the frantic final moments of his patients. He watched as they realized the door wouldn't budge. He watched as they clawed at the soundproofed walls until their fingernails bled. He watched the light fade from their eyes, experiencing a godlike rush that no amount of stolen gold could ever provide. By the time the police uncovered the charnel house in 1944, the sheer volume of evidence was staggering. They found a basement filled with the silent witnesses of the disappeared: 72 suitcases, hundreds of pairs of shoes, and a collection of fur coats that still held the faint, ghostly scent of perfume. In the courtyard, 2 massive pits of quicklime were discovered, containing the partially dissolved remains of men, women, and children. The forensic team worked through the overwhelming stench of decay to count the skulls, but the numbers kept climbing. It wasn't just a crime scene, it was an industrial-scale slaughterhouse. The investigators were certain they were hunting a monster, but they soon realized they were hunting a phantom. While the police were cataloging the bones in his basement, Petiot was already miles away, assuming a new identity and, remarkably, joining the very forces tasked with finding him. He wasn't just hiding. He was participating in his own manhunt, reading the case files of his own crimes. The predator had successfully camouflaged himself as the hunter, and as the liberation of Paris began, the trail for the butcher of Rue le Sueur was growing cold. But Petiot's arrogance, the one trait he could never suppress, was about to lead him into a trap of his own making, beginning with a single, handwritten letter that would seal his fate. The predator had successfully camouflaged himself as the hunter, and as the liberation of Paris began, the trail for the butcher of Rue le Sueur was growing cold. But Petiot's arrogance, the one trait he could never suppress, was about to lead him into a trap of his own making, beginning with a single, handwritten letter that would seal his fate. In the chaos of post-war Paris, Petiot had assumed the alias Henri Valery, even rising to the rank of captain in the French forces of the interior. He was hiding in plain sight, judging others for the very crimes he had perfected. But when a French newspaper published an article branding him a Gestapo collaborator, his ego couldn't stay silent. He penned a rebuttal, claiming he was a patriot who had killed only for the glory of France. That letter was his confession, written in the ink of vanity. On October 31st, 1944, the masquerade ended at a metro station. The man who had eluded the Nazi occupation was finally shackled by the people he claimed to serve. The trial began on March 18th, 1946, and it was a spectacle of the macabre. Petiot entered the courtroom not as a broken man, but as a lead actor taking the stage. He leaned back in his chair, sketching caricatures of the jurors, cracking jokes, and laughing at the testimony of grieving families. He was a master of the pivot, spinning a narrative where 21 Rue le Sueur was not a slaughterhouse, but a headquarters for a fictional resistance cell he called Fly-Tox. He admitted to 63 killings, but he called them executions of the enemy. The prosecution, however, presented the silent witnesses that Petiot's furnace couldn't fully consume. They didn't just have bone fragments and teeth recovered from the quicklime. They had the suitcases. 135 pieces of luggage, meticulously stacked, containing the intimate artifacts of lives interrupted. There were baby clothes, wedding rings, and silk stockings. The jury looked at this mountain of stolen property and saw the truth. A resistance fighter kills for a cause. A predator kills for the luggage. The most chilling revelation came from the architecture of the house itself. Forensic investigators detailed the triangular room, the double-thick soundproofed walls, and the iron rings set into the masonry. But the centerpiece of this theater of cruelty was the peephole. From the safety of an adjacent hallway, Petiot had watched his victims through a glass lens as the poison took hold. He didn't just want them dead. He wanted to witness the exact moment the light left their eyes. It was a voyeuristic addiction, a god complex, fed by the rhythmic gasping of the innocent. On the morning of May 25th, 1946, the performance reached its final act. As he was led to the courtyard of the Santé prison, where the guillotine waited, Petiot remained defiant. He told the guards his conscience was clean. He even offered a final piece of advice to the witnesses, telling them to look away. It won't be pretty. With a sharp, metallic hiss, the blade fell, ending the life of the most prolific serial killer in French history. But as the case files were closed, a haunting realization remained. Investigators never found the money. The millions in gold and jewels Petiot had extorted from the desperate were gone, vanished into the ether. Somewhere in the shadows of Paris, the butcher's true legacy, a fortune built on the bones of the disappeared, remains buried, waiting for a different kind of predator to find it. The doctor may be dead, but his secrets are still breathing in the dark,